The morning mist clung to the windows of Clarence's house like secrets refusing to be told. Inside, the grand corridors echoed with the soft footsteps of staff members going about their daily routines. Among them was Thomas Mitchell, a security guard who had served the royal household for 15 years. His weathered face carried the weight of countless secrets he had witnessed, but none quite like what he would discover on this particular autumn morning. Thomas had always been known for his discretion and loyalty. At 52 years old, he had seen 3 different royal residents come and go from Clarence's house, but his dedication never wavered. He took pride in being invisible yet ever present, a guardian who noticed everything while appearing to see nothing at all. His colleagues respected him for his professionalism, and the royal family trusted him implicitly. The day began like any other. Thomas arrived at his post at 6 in the morning, just as the first rays of sunlight began to pierce through the London fog. He made his rounds, checking the perimeter, reviewing the overnight reports, and ensuring everything was secure for the day ahead. Prince William was expected to visit later that afternoon for a private meeting with his stepmother, something that had become increasingly rare in recent months. As Thomas walked through the East Wing, he noticed something unusual. The door to Camilla's private study was slightly ajar, which was odd because she was meticulous about keeping her personal spaces locked when not in use. He approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. The royal protection protocols were clear about investigating any anomalies, no matter how minor they might seem. Peering through the gap, Thomas could see that the room appeared empty. The heavy curtains were drawn, casting the study in a dim amber light. Camilla's mahogany desk sat in the center of the room, its surface usually pristine and organized. Today, however, it looked disturbed. Papers were scattered across it, and what appeared to be ash lay in a small pile near an ornate letter opener. Thomas hesitated for a moment, weighing his options. His training told him to report the irregularity immediately. But something deeper, an instinct honed by years of service, urged him to investigate further. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking softly in protest. The smell that greeted him was unmistakable: burned paper. Moving into the room with practiced stealth, Thomas could see that someone had been burning documents in the fireplace. The grate still contained fragments of charred paper, though the fire had long since died out. This was highly unusual, as Clarence's house had strict protocols about document disposal, especially for materials that might contain sensitive information. Near the fireplace, partially hidden beneath Camilla's reading chair, Thomas spotted something that made his heart race. It was a corner of what appeared to be official stationery, cream-colored with an embossed crest that he recognized immediately. It was from Buckingham Palace, and it bore the unmistakable royal seal. Whatever had been burned, it had been important enough to warrant the highest level of correspondence. Thomas knelt down and carefully retrieved the fragment. The paper felt expensive between his fingers, and he could make out parts of what appeared to be a formal salutation. Though most of the text was gone, he could clearly see His Royal Highness written in elegant script. His pulse quickened as he realized he might be holding evidence of something significant. As he stood up, Thomas heard footsteps approaching in the corridor outside. Quickly, he pocketed the paper fragment and moved toward the window, pretending to check the locks, as he had been trained to do during his routine security sweeps. The footsteps passed by without stopping, but the incident had shaken him more than he cared to admit. For the rest of the morning, Thomas found himself distracted. He went through his duties mechanically, but his mind kept returning to the burned papers and the fragment in his pocket. Years of service had taught him that the royal family's private affairs were exactly that, private. He had witnessed arguments, celebrations, moments of joy and sorrow, but he had never interfered or spoken about what he had seen. That was the unwritten rule of his profession. However, this felt different. The deliberate destruction of what appeared to be official correspondence suggested something more serious than a simple family disagreement. The fact that it had been done in secret, likely during the early hours when most of the staff would be off duty, indicated that someone was trying to hide something important. During his lunch break, Thomas sat in the staff quarters, staring at his untouched sandwich. He pulled out the paper fragment and examined it more closely under the fluorescent lights. The embossing was definitely authentic. He had seen enough royal correspondence over the years to recognize the real thing. More troubling was what appeared to be a partial date in the corner. October 15, 2024. Just 3 days ago, his colleague Sarah, a housekeeping supervisor, noticed his preoccupation. "You all right, Tom?" she asked, settling down across from him with her own lunch. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Thomas quickly folded the paper and put it away. "Just tired," he replied, forcing a smile. "Long night watching the monitors." Sarah studied his face with the shrewd expression of someone who had worked in royal households for decades. "You know, in my 20 years here, I've learned that sometimes the things we don't see are just as important as the things we do see." Her words hit Thomas like a punch to the stomach. Sarah had a reputation for being observant and wise, and her comment felt less like casual conversation and more like a warning or advice. He wondered if she had noticed something unusual as well, or if his own behavior was betraying his discovery. The afternoon brought Prince William's arrival, as scheduled. Thomas watched from his post as the prince's car pulled up to the main entrance. William looked tired, his usually composed demeanor showing signs of strain. He nodded politely to the staff as he entered, but there was a tension in his movements that suggested this was not a social visit. Thomas had observed William's interactions with Camilla over the years, and he could sense the subtle dynamics at play. While they maintained a cordial relationship in public, there had always been an underlying formality that spoke to deeper complexities. Today, that tension seemed more pronounced than usual. As William disappeared into the private areas of the house, Thomas found himself wondering what conversation was taking place behind closed doors. Was it related to the burned documents? Was William aware that potentially important correspondence had been destroyed? The questions gnawed at him as he continued his duties. The afternoon stretched on with an almost oppressive quiet. Even the usually bustling household seemed subdued, as if everyone could sense that something significant was happening. Thomas made his rounds more frequently than necessary, hoping to catch some glimpse of what was transpiring, but the private meeting rooms remained sealed from his view. Around 4 o'clock, Thomas noticed increased activity among the senior staff. Cars began arriving, not the usual royal convoy, but discreet vehicles that suggested this gathering was not part of any official schedule. He recognized some of the passengers, senior advisors, legal representatives, and what appeared to be document specialists from the royal archives. The pieces were beginning to form a picture that made Thomas increasingly uncomfortable. Whatever had been burned in Camilla's study that morning was significant enough to require immediate damage control. The arrival of legal and archival experts suggested that the destroyed documents might have had historical or legal importance that went far beyond personal correspondence. As evening approached, Thomas found himself torn between his professional obligations and a growing sense that he might be in possession of information that could be crucial to understanding what was happening. The paper fragment in his pocket seemed to burn against his leg, a constant reminder of the choice he faced. His shift was supposed to end at 8 o'clock, but the ongoing high-level meeting meant that security protocols required him to remain on duty until all visitors had departed. As he waited, Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He would find a way to examine the fireplace more thoroughly when the opportunity arose. The chance came sooner than expected. Around 7:30, all the senior staff and visitors moved to the main conference room on the ground floor for what appeared to be an extended discussion. The East Wing, including Camilla's study, was temporarily empty except for routine security patrols. Thomas made his way back to the study, his heart pounding with each step. The room was exactly as he had left it that morning, though someone had obviously cleaned up the scattered papers from the desk. The fireplace, however, remained untouched, its contents apparently overlooked in the hurried tidying. Using a small flashlight from his security kit, Thomas carefully examined the grate. Among the ash and charred remnants, he could make out fragments of what appeared to be multiple documents. Most were too damaged to read, but one piece, slightly larger than the rest, caught his attention. It appeared to be part of a letterhead, and though most of the text was gone, he could clearly see the beginning of what looked like an official communication. More importantly, wedged between two of the grate's iron bars, he found something that made his blood run cold. It was a small piece of paper, somehow protected from the flames, that contained what appeared to be part of a signature. First, it's a never-sounded action. The handwriting was distinctive, elegant, and unmistakably royal. Though he couldn't make out the complete name, the style was one he had seen many times before on official documents. Thomas carefully extracted the fragment and examined it under his flashlight. His hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the realization of what he might be holding. This wasn't just any correspondence. This appeared to be part of an official communication that bore a royal signature, something that would never be casually destroyed unless the circumstances were extraordinary. The sound of voices in the corridor snapped him back to reality. The meeting was apparently taking a break and people were moving through the house again. Thomas quickly secured the new fragment with the first one and left the study, his mind racing with the implications of what he had discovered. As he resumed his post, Thomas watched the various officials and advisors moving through the corridors with new eyes. Their serious expressions and hushed conversations took on a different meaning now that he understood something significant had been deliberately concealed. The weight of his discovery felt enormous, and he began to question whether his years of discretion and loyalty might be protecting something that shouldn't be hidden. The evening concluded with Prince William's departure just after 9 o'clock. Thomas observed the prince as he left, noting that his earlier tension had been replaced by what looked like resignation mixed with determination. Whatever had been discussed during the lengthy meetings, it appeared that decisions had been made and courses of action determined. As the last of the visitors departed and the house settled into its evening routine, Thomas found himself alone with the most difficult decision of his professional life. In his pocket, he carried fragments of what appeared to be deliberately destroyed royal correspondence. The question that haunted him as he finally headed home was simple yet profound. What was his duty when loyalty to the institution might conflict with loyalty to the truth? The London streets were quiet as Thomas walked to the tube station, but his mind was anything but peaceful. 15 years of faithful service had taught him that the royal family's private affairs were sacred, protected by centuries of tradition and protocol. Yet the events of this day suggested that something was happening that went beyond normal family dynamics or political maneuvering. The fragments in his pocket represented more than just burned paper. They were evidence of a deliberate attempt to hide something significant. As a protector of the royal family, Thomas had to consider whether that protection sometimes meant protecting them from themselves, or whether his greater duty was to ensure that truth and justice prevailed, regardless of the personal cost. As his train pulled into the station, Thomas made a mental note to research everything he could about document preservation and royal protocols regarding correspondence. Tomorrow, he would face the choice that would define not only his career but potentially the future of the royal family itself. The silent proof he carried would not remain silent forever, and Thomas Mitchell, loyal guardian of royal secrets, was about to become something he had never imagined, a keeper of dangerous truths. The sleepless night had left Thomas Mitchell with dark circles under his eyes, and a resolve that surprised even him. He arrived at Clarence House 30 minutes early, using the extra time to walk the perimeter and think through his options. The autumn air was crisp, cutting through the fog of confusion that had clouded his judgment the previous evening. In the harsh light of dawn, the path forward seemed clearer, though no less dangerous. Thomas had spent hours researching royal correspondence protocols on his personal computer, learning things that made his discovery even more troubling. Official royal communications were never destroyed without proper authorization and documentation. Every piece of correspondence bearing the royal seal was considered a historical document, subject to archival procedures that ensured its preservation for future generations. The casual burning of such materials wasn't just unusual, it was potentially illegal. As he entered the staff quarters, Thomas noticed an immediate change in atmosphere. The usually cheerful morning chatter was subdued, and several of his colleagues avoided making eye contact. Word had clearly spread about yesterday's emergency meetings and the presence of legal advisors. In a household where discretion was paramount, such obvious crisis management activities had not gone unnoticed. Margaret Wells, the head housekeeper who had worked at Clarence House longer than anyone else, approached Thomas as he prepared for his shift. Her weathered face bore an expression of concern that immediately put him on alert. "Thomas, I need to speak with you privately," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. She led him to a small office used for inventory management, closing the door firmly behind them. "Yesterday, you were assigned to the East Wing during the morning hours," Margaret began without preamble. "I need to know if you observed anything unusual in Her Royal Highness's study." The directness of the question caught Thomas off guard, though he managed to keep his expression neutral. Margaret's reputation for knowing everything that happened in the household was legendary, and her inquiry suggested that his earlier visit to the study might not have gone unnoticed. "I performed my usual security checks," Thomas replied carefully. "The door was ajar, which was unusual, so I investigated to ensure there were no security concerns." Margaret studied his face with sharp eyes that had seen decades of royal household drama. "And what did you find during this investigation?" Thomas felt the weight of the paper fragments in his pocket, but something in Margaret's manner warned him to proceed with extreme caution. The room appeared secure. "I noticed some ash in the fireplace, but nothing that seemed to present a security risk." "I see," Margaret said slowly. "Thomas, I want you to understand something. Yesterday's events have created a very delicate situation. There are people asking questions about what might have been observed or collected during routine security checks. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" The implied threat was clear, though delivered with the practiced subtlety of someone who had navigated royal household politics for decades. Thomas felt his chest tighten as he realized that his discovery had not gone unnoticed. Someone knew he had been in that study, and someone was concerned about what he might have found. "I understand," Thomas replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "I take my professional obligations very seriously, Margaret. I always have." "Good," she said, though her expression remained troubled. "There may be some changes to your duties today. You're being temporarily reassigned to the main entrance security post. Detective Inspector Crawford from the Metropolitan Police will be arriving this afternoon to conduct some routine interviews with staff members. Nothing to be concerned about, of course, just standard procedure when there are questions about document security." Thomas's blood ran cold. The involvement of the Metropolitan Police suggested that whatever had been destroyed was significant enough to warrant a criminal investigation. His reassignment to the main entrance was clearly designed to keep him away from the scene of his discovery and limit his access to sensitive areas of the house. As he left Margaret's office, Thomas felt the walls closing in around him. The fragments in his pocket now felt less like evidence and more like a ticking time bomb. If the police were investigating document destruction, possessing pieces of the destroyed materials could make him appear complicit in whatever had occurred. His new assignment at the main entrance provided an unexpected advantage, however. From this position, Thomas could observe everyone entering and leaving Clarence House. More importantly, he would be among the first to see Prince William when he arrived for his scheduled visit later that day. The morning passed slowly, with Thomas greeting various officials, staff members, and delivery personnel. Each person who entered seemed to carry an air of tension, as if the entire household was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The normal rhythm of royal household activities had been disrupted, replaced by an undercurrent of anxiety that affected everyone from the most senior advisors to the newest kitchen staff. Around noon, Detective Inspector Crawford arrived. Thomas recognized him immediately from newspaper photographs. Crawford was known for his work on high-profile cases involving government officials and public figures. His presence at Clarence House confirmed that this was no routine investigation. Crawford was a tall, lean man in his 50s, with penetrating gray eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to uncovering secrets that others preferred to keep hidden. He moved through the entrance with the confidence of someone who understood the weight of his authority, even within the rarefied world of royal residences. "Good afternoon, Officer Mitchell," Crawford said, pausing at Thomas's post. The fact that he knew Thomas's name without introduction was both impressive and unsettling. "I understand you've been reassigned to entrance duty today." "Yes, sir," Thomas replied, maintaining his professional demeanor despite his racing heart. "Temporary reassignment as needed for operational requirements." Crawford nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Thomas's face. "I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to speak later." "I always find that security personnel have the most comprehensive view of daily activities." The detective's words carried multiple layers of meaning, and Thomas understood that he was being put on notice. Crawford clearly suspected that the security staff knew more than they were saying, and he would be conducting his interviews with that assumption in mind. As Crawford disappeared into the interior of the house, Thomas felt his resolve crystallizing. The detective's arrival had changed everything. If Thomas was going to act on his discovery, it had to be soon. Once the formal investigation began in earnest, any evidence he possessed would become infinitely more dangerous to hold on to. The afternoon brought Prince William's arrival precisely on schedule. Thomas watched as the prince's car pulled up to the entrance, noting the increased security presence that surrounded the visit. Today's meeting was clearly considered more sensitive than the previous day's gathering. Prince William emerged from the car looking grim but determined. As he approached the entrance, his eyes met Thomas's briefly, and for a moment, the guard thought he saw something. A flicker of concern, perhaps even fear, in the prince's expression. It was gone so quickly that Thomas might have imagined it, but the impression lingered. "Good afternoon, Your Royal Highness," Thomas said, following protocol as he opened the door. "Good afternoon, Thomas," William replied, using his name in a way that suggested he knew exactly who Thomas was and what role he played in the household's security. "I trust everything is secure today?" The question seemed loaded with meaning beyond its surface content. Thomas had the distinct impression that William was asking about more than just physical security, but he couldn't be certain what the prince was really trying to communicate. "Everything is secure, sir," Thomas replied carefully. "All protocols are being followed." William nodded and moved into the house, but not before giving Thomas one more searching look. The interaction left Thomas with the uncomfortable feeling that he was being evaluated by multiple parties, each with their own agenda and expectations. Throughout the afternoon, Thomas observed a steady stream of visitors entering and leaving the house: legal advisors, royal household officials, and what appeared to be document experts all moved through the entrance with serious expressions and hushed conversations. The scale of the response suggested that whatever had been destroyed was of enormous importance. Around 4 o'clock, Thomas noticed something that made his pulse quicken. A van from the National Archives arrived, followed by several vehicles carrying what appeared to be forensic document specialists. The involvement of the National Archives confirmed his worst fears. Official historical documents had indeed been destroyed, possibly in violation of laws governing the preservation of royal correspondence. As he watched the specialists unload their equipment, Thomas realized that time was running out for him to make a decision about the fragments he possessed. Once the forensic team began their work, any evidence he held would become crucial to their investigation. Holding on to it would make him an accessory after the fact, while turning it over would require him to explain how he had obtained it. The solution came to him with startling clarity. He needed to get the fragments to Prince William directly, bypassing the investigation entirely. William had the right to know what had been destroyed, and he had the authority to determine how the information should be used. More importantly, giving the evidence to William would fulfill Thomas's duty to protect the royal family while ensuring that the truth was not permanently buried. The challenge would be finding an opportunity to make contact with William without alerting the various officials and investigators who were now monitoring every aspect of the household's activities. Thomas would need to be creative, and he would need to act soon. His opportunity came unexpectedly when Margaret Wells approached his post around 5 o'clock. "Thomas, His Royal Highness has requested that you personally escort him to his car when his meeting concludes. He specifically asked for you." The request was unusual enough to be significant. Prince William clearly wanted to speak with Thomas privately, and he was using his authority to arrange a legitimate reason for them to be alone together, however briefly. Thomas felt a surge of hope mixed with apprehension as he realized that William might already suspect what Thomas had discovered. The waiting was excruciating. Thomas maintained his professional demeanor while his mind raced through possible scenarios for how the handover might occur. He would have only moments to pass the fragments to William and explain their significance. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. As evening approached, the forensic team completed their initial assessment of Camilla's study. Thomas could see them leaving with several sealed evidence bags suggesting they had found additional fragments or traces of the destroyed documents. Their grim expressions indicated that whatever they had discovered confirmed the seriousness of the situation. Detective Inspector Crawford emerged from the house shortly after the forensic team departed. He paused at Thomas's post, studying the guard's face with those penetrating gray eyes. "Officer Mitchell, I'll need to speak with you tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. Please ensure you're available." "Of course, sir," Thomas replied, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Crawford's tone suggested that tomorrow's interview would be far from routine. As Crawford left, Thomas realized that his window for action was closing rapidly. Tomorrow's interview would likely involve detailed questions about his activities yesterday morning, and he would be expected to provide a full account of everything he had observed. Lying to a police detective investigating document destruction would be a serious crime, but possessing evidence without reporting it was equally problematic. Around 7 o'clock, word came that Prince William was preparing to leave. Thomas positioned himself near the main entrance, acutely aware that this might be his only chance to act on his discovery. The fragments in his pocket seemed to weigh more with each passing minute, and he could feel perspiration gathering on his forehead despite the cool evening air. The sound of footsteps in the corridor announced William's approach. Thomas straightened his uniform and prepared for what might be the most important conversation of his career. Everything he had learned about loyalty, duty, and service would be tested in the next few minutes. Prince William appeared at the entrance accompanied by two of his personal protection officers. His expression was carefully neutral, but Thomas could sense the tension radiating from him. Whatever had been discussed during today's meetings, it had clearly not resolved the crisis that yesterday's document destruction had created. "Thomas, would you escort me to my car, please?" William asked, his voice carrying just the right tone of routine authority to make the request seem perfectly normal to any observers. "Certainly, Your Royal Highness," Thomas replied, falling into step beside William as they moved toward the waiting vehicle. As they walked across the courtyard, William spoke quietly without looking directly at Thomas. "I understand you were on duty yesterday morning when certain irregularities were discovered." Thomas felt his mouth go dry, but he managed to keep his voice steady. "Yes, sir. I performed my regular security checks as scheduled. And during those checks, did you observe anything that might be relevant to current circumstances?" The question hung in the air between them as they approached William's car. Thomas could see the protection officers positioning themselves at a discreet distance, close enough to respond to any threat but far enough away to provide the illusion of privacy. This was the moment of truth. Thomas reached into his pocket and palmed the paper fragments, preparing to make the most important decision of his life. The future of the royal family might depend on what happened in the next 30 seconds, and Thomas Mitchell, a simple security guard who had spent 15 years protecting royal secrets, was about to become the guardian of the most dangerous truth of all. The moment stretched between them like a bridge over an abyss. Thomas felt the paper fragments warm against his palm as he made his choice. In one fluid motion, he pressed the pieces into Prince William's hand as he opened the car door, the exchange hidden from view by the angle of his body. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yesterday morning I discovered evidence that someone attempted to destroy official correspondence. These fragments survived the burning." William's fingers closed around the papers, his face remaining impassive despite what Thomas could only imagine was shock at the guard's revelation. The prince stepped into his vehicle without acknowledging what had just transpired, but as the car pulled away, Thomas caught a glimpse of William's reflection in the window. He was already examining the fragments with intense concentration. Thomas returned to his post with legs that felt unsteady. The weight of 15 years of loyal service suddenly shifted onto new foundations. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, moving from observer to participant in whatever crisis was engulfing the royal household. The relief he felt at passing along the evidence was tempered by the knowledge that his actions would have consequences he couldn't yet foresee. The remainder of his shift passed in a blur of routine activities that felt anything but routine. Every official who entered or left Clarence House seemed to carry additional significance now that Thomas understood the magnitude of what was unfolding. The carefully orchestrated normalcy of royal household operations had been disrupted by forces that went far beyond his understanding, and he had become an unwitting player in a drama whose script was still being written. That evening, as Thomas finally headed home, he found himself looking over his shoulder more than usual. The streets of London felt different somehow, as if the very act of revealing royal secrets had changed his relationship with the world around him. He wondered if this was how all whistleblowers felt, simultaneously vindicated and terrified by their choices. His small flat in South London had never felt more like a sanctuary. Thomas double-locked the door and closed the curtains before allowing himself to fully process what he had done. The evidence was now in Prince William's hands, but that didn't mean Thomas was safe. Detective Inspector Crawford would still expect answers tomorrow morning, and Thomas would have to navigate that interview without revealing his actions, while also avoiding outright lies that could constitute obstruction of justice. Sleep was elusive that night. Thomas found himself staring at the ceiling, running through possible scenarios for how tomorrow's interview might unfold. Crawford struck him as the kind of investigator who would probe every inconsistency and challenge every statement until he found the truth he was seeking. Thomas would need to be extraordinarily careful about how he framed his responses. The next morning brought an unexpected development. As Thomas arrived at Clarence House, he was met by Margaret Wells, who looked as if she hadn't slept any better than he had. "Thomas, there's been a change of plans," she announced without preamble. "Detective Inspector Crawford's interview has been postponed indefinitely." New information has come to light that has shifted the focus of the investigation. Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. Had Prince William already acted on the fragments he had been given? The timing seemed too coincidental to be unrelated to yesterday evening's exchange. "What kind of new information?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his voice casual despite his racing pulse. Margaret's expression was carefully neutral, but Thomas caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Relief, perhaps, or vindication. "I'm not privy to the details, but it appears that certain assumptions about document destruction were incorrect. The investigation is now proceeding along different lines." Before Thomas could ask any follow-up questions, Margaret had moved on to discuss his duty assignments for the day. He was being returned to his normal rotation in the East Wing, a development that suggested the immediate crisis had passed, at least from the perspective of household security. As Thomas made his way to his usual post, he encountered Sarah from housekeeping, who gave him a knowing look that made him wonder exactly how much the staff understood about recent events. "Funny how things have a way of working themselves out," she said quietly as they passed in the corridor. "Sometimes the truth has a way of finding its voice even when people try to keep it silent." Her comment seemed too pointed to be coincidental, and Thomas began to suspect that his actions yesterday evening had not gone entirely unnoticed. The royal household's informal network of communication was legendary for its efficiency, and news of significant developments rarely stayed secret for long among the staff. The morning proceeded with an undercurrent of anticipation that seemed to affect everyone in the building. Phone calls were made behind closed doors, meetings were hastily arranged and then just as quickly canceled, and senior staff members moved through the corridors with expressions that suggested momentous decisions were being considered. Around 11 o'clock, Thomas observed an arrival that confirmed his suspicions about how quickly events were moving. Sir Edward Hartwell, the Queen's private secretary, arrived with a small entourage that included what appeared to be senior legal advisors and constitutional experts. Sir Edward's involvement meant that whatever was happening had escalated to the highest levels of the royal household's administrative structure. Thomas had encountered Sir Edward on several occasions during his years of service, and he knew the man's reputation for handling delicate situations with absolute discretion. If Sir Edward was personally involved, it meant that the destroyed documents had implications that went far beyond a simple family disagreement or administrative oversight. The morning's most significant development came just before noon, when Prince William arrived unannounced and without his usual security detail. Thomas was at his post in the East Wing when he saw the prince enter through a side entrance typically used only by family members seeking to avoid public attention. William's demeanor was markedly different from his previous visits, where before he had seemed tense and uncertain. Today he moved with the focused determination of someone who had made a difficult decision and was prepared to see it through. He carried a briefcase that Thomas hadn't seen before, and his path took him directly toward Camilla's study. 20 minutes later, William emerged from the study accompanied by Sir Edward and two of the legal advisors. They moved as a group toward the main conference room, their expressions grave but purposeful. Thomas couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language suggested that important revelations were being discussed and acted upon. The afternoon brought a stream of high-ranking officials to Clarence House, creating a level of activity that rivaled state occasions in its intensity. Thomas recognized faces from government departments, the judiciary, and what appeared to be representatives from various Commonwealth realms. Whatever was unfolding, it clearly had implications that extended far beyond the British royal family. Around 3 o'clock, Thomas was approached by one of Prince William's private secretaries, a young woman named Victoria Ashworth who handled the prince's most sensitive correspondence. "Officer Mitchell, His Royal Highness would like to thank you personally for your diligence in maintaining security protocols," she said formally, but her eyes conveyed additional meaning. "He particularly appreciates staff members who understand the importance of ensuring that all relevant information reaches the appropriate authorities." The message was clear. William was acknowledging Thomas's role in bringing the destroyed documents to his attention, and he was expressing gratitude for the guard's actions. More importantly, he was indicating that Thomas had made the right choice in coming forward with the evidence. "Please convey to His Royal Highness that I was simply performing my duties as I understood them," Thomas replied, matching Victoria's formal tone while understanding the subtext of their exchange. As Victoria departed, Thomas felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't fully recognized was there. Prince William's acknowledgement meant that Thomas's actions were not only appreciated, but had been instrumental in whatever resolution was now taking place. The guard's instinct to preserve and reveal the evidence had been vindicated by events. The late afternoon brought the most dramatic development yet. Detective Inspector Crawford returned to Clarence House, but this time his demeanor was markedly different. Where before he had moved with the confidence of an investigator pursuing a clear line of inquiry, today he seemed uncertain, almost deferential in his interactions with the royal household staff. Thomas observed Crawford's meeting with Sir Edward from a distance, noting the detective's increasingly animated gestures and the calm, authoritative responses from the Queen's private secretary. Whatever Crawford was being told was clearly not what he had expected to hear, and the power dynamics of the investigation appeared to have shifted dramatically. After Crawford's departure, Sir Edward made an announcement to the senior household staff that sent ripples of relief and satisfaction throughout Clarence House. While Thomas wasn't privy to the specific details, the general message was clear. The crisis had been resolved, the investigation had been concluded satisfactorily, and normal operations would resume immediately. That evening, as Thomas prepared to end his shift, he was approached once more by Margaret Wells. Her demeanor toward him had changed noticeably since the morning, carrying a warmth and respect that hadn't been there during their tense conversation the previous day. "Thomas, I want you to know that your professionalism during this difficult period has been noted at the highest levels," she said, her voice carrying genuine appreciation. "Sometimes those of us in service are called upon to make choices that test our understanding of where our true loyalties lie. You made the right choice." Her words confirmed what Thomas had begun to suspect. His decision to preserve and reveal the destroyed documents had been not only appreciated but crucial to resolving whatever crisis had threatened the royal family. The fragments he had rescued from the fireplace had apparently contained information significant enough to change the entire trajectory of the investigation. As Thomas walked home through the London evening, he reflected on the strange turn his life had taken over the past 3 days. A routine security check had led to a discovery that had ultimately required him to choose between different interpretations of his duty and loyalty. The choice he had made, to ensure that potentially crucial information reached Prince William, had apparently been the right one, but it had also forever changed his role within the royal household. The fragments of burned correspondence had indeed been silent proof, but their silence had been temporary. Through Thomas's actions, they had found their voice and spoken truths that had needed to be heard. The full implications of what those truths were, and how they would affect the future of the royal family, remained to be seen. But Thomas was confident that he had played his part in ensuring that justice and transparency had prevailed over concealment and deception. The loyal guard who had spent 15 years protecting royal secrets had ultimately served the royal family best by ensuring that one particular secret could no longer be kept. In doing so, he had redefined what it meant to be truly loyal. Not to the institution as it was, but to what it could and should be when guided by truth rather than expedience. As he reached his front door, Thomas Mitchell allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight he could rest in the knowledge that he had upheld the highest ideals of his profession, even when doing so had required him to challenge the very system he had sworn to protect. 3 weeks had passed since the crisis at Clarence House, and Thomas Mitchell found himself settling into a new rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely different. His daily duties remained largely unchanged. The same security protocols, the same careful observation of household activities, the same commitment to discretion that had defined his career for 15 years. Yet everything had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. The most obvious change was in how he was treated by the senior staff. Where once he had been a respected but largely invisible presence, now he found himself included in conversations and consultations that had previously been above his pay grade. Margaret Wells sought his opinion on security matters with a deference that hadn't existed before, and even Sir Edward Hartwell had personally thanked him for his service during a brief encounter in the corridors. More significantly, Prince William had arranged for Thomas to receive a commendation for exceptional service, though the citation was deliberately vague about the specific circumstances that had earned him the recognition. The formal ceremony was small and private. attended only by immediate household staff. But the symbolism was clear. Thomas's actions had been not only appreciated but officially acknowledged at the highest levels. The investigation into the document destruction had concluded with what the official reports described as a satisfactory resolution of all outstanding issues. Detective Inspector Crawford had closed his files without pursuing charges, though rumors among the household staff suggested that significant private settlements and agreements had been reached behind closed doors. The exact nature of those agreements remained classified, but their effects were beginning to ripple through the royal family's operations in ways that suggested fundamental changes were taking place. Thomas had learned fragments of the truth through careful observation and the household's informal communication network. The destroyed documents had apparently contained correspondence that would have significantly altered public understanding of certain royal family dynamics and historical events. While the specific content remained secret, the fact that Prince William had been able to use the rescued fragments to negotiate a resolution suggested that the information had provided him with considerable leverage in family discussions. The most visible change was in Camilla's behavior and schedule. Her public appearances had been reduced significantly, and sources close to the royal household suggested that she was taking time to reassess her priorities and commitments. Translation through the lens of royal diplomatic language meant that she was being quietly sidelined while the family dealt with whatever revelations the burned letters had contained. Prince William, meanwhile, had emerged from the crisis with enhanced authority and a more prominent role in royal decision-making. His meetings with senior advisors had increased in frequency and scope, and he was taking on responsibilities that suggested he was being prepared for an accelerated transition to greater leadership within the family structure. The quiet confidence he now displayed was markedly different from the tension and uncertainty that had characterized his demeanor during the crisis. For Thomas, the most profound change was in his understanding of his own role and responsibilities. The events of 3 weeks ago had forced him to confront fundamental questions about the nature of loyalty, duty, and service that he had never previously considered. His decision to preserve and reveal the destroyed documents had been vindicated by subsequent events, but it had also opened his eyes to the complex moral landscape that royal household staff were required to navigate. The revelation came during a conversation with Sarah from housekeeping, who had become something of a confidant since the crisis. They were taking their lunch break in the staff quarters when she broached a subject that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "Tom, can I ask you something?" she said quietly, glancing around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "That morning when you found the burned papers in Her Royal Highness's study, did you know immediately that they were important?" Thomas considered his response carefully. Even among trusted colleagues, discussing the specifics of his discovery required discretion. "I knew they were official correspondence," he replied. The royal seal on the fragments made that clear. What made me act was the realization that official documents were being destroyed outside proper protocols. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I've been working in royal households for 20 years, and I've learned that sometimes the most important information comes from what people try to hide, rather than what they choose to reveal." Her observation struck Thomas as particularly insightful, and it prompted him to share something he had been keeping to himself since the crisis ended. "Sarah, I've been wondering about something. How did you know to mention that comment about things being important for what we don't see as well as what we do see?" "That was the day after I made my discovery." A small smile crossed Sarah's weathered face. "Tom, in 20 years of cleaning royal residences, you learn to notice when someone has been burning documents in a fireplace that hasn't been used all season. You also notice when security guards start looking troubled and distracted after performing their routine duties." Thomas felt a chill of realization. "You knew what I had found?" "I suspected," Sarah replied carefully, "and I suspected that you were the kind of person who would do the right thing with whatever information you had discovered. Sometimes we all need a little encouragement to trust our instincts." The conversation revealed a layer of the royal household's operations that Thomas had never fully appreciated. The staff members weren't simply individual employees performing isolated duties. They were part of an informal network that observed, assessed, and sometimes influenced events in ways that the official hierarchy never recognized. Sarah's subtle encouragement 3 weeks ago had been deliberate, designed to help Thomas reach the conclusion she believed was correct. How many others knew or suspected what was happening? Thomas asked, though he wasn't entirely certain he wanted to know the answer. "More than you might think," Sarah replied. The burning documents weren't the only unusual activity that week. Several of us noticed irregular meetings, unusual visitor patterns, and changes in normal routines that suggested something significant was happening. What we didn't know was what was being concealed, or whether anyone would have the courage to ensure the truth came out. The revelation that his actions had been observed and quietly supported by other staff members added another dimension to Thomas's understanding of recent events. He hadn't been acting alone, even when he had felt most isolated. The royal household's informal network had been subtly working to ensure that the right information reached the right people at the right time. This understanding was reinforced a few days later when Thomas encountered Victoria Ashworth, Prince William's private secretary, in the corridor outside the East Wing offices. She approached him with an expression that suggested their conversation would be more substantive than the brief exchange they had shared 3 weeks earlier. "Officer Mitchell, His Royal Highness has asked me to convey his appreciation for the ongoing discretion you've shown regarding recent events," she began formally. "He also wants you to know that the information you preserved has proven instrumental in resolving several long-standing family issues that had been causing considerable concern." Thomas felt a surge of vindication at hearing that his actions had contributed to resolving broader problems beyond the immediate crisis. "I'm glad my assistance was helpful, ma'am. Is there anything else His Royal Highness needs from me regarding these matters?" Victoria paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "Actually, there is something. His Royal Highness is implementing new protocols for document security and information management within the royal household. He would like you to serve as a security advisor for these new procedures, given your demonstrated understanding of the importance of preserving and protecting sensitive information." The offer was both an honor and a responsibility that Thomas hadn't expected. Accepting it would mean taking on a more senior role within the household security structure, with authority to review and improve the very systems that had failed during the document destruction crisis. It was also a clear indication that Prince William viewed Thomas as a trusted ally whose judgment could be relied upon in sensitive matters. "I would be honored to serve in whatever capacity His Royal Highness deems appropriate," Thomas replied, understanding that he was accepting more than just a job promotion. "Excellent," Victoria said with what appeared to be genuine relief. "The new protocols will require working closely with legal advisors, archival specialists, and senior household staff to ensure that sensitive information is both protected and preserved according to proper standards. Your experience and perspective will be invaluable in developing these procedures." As Victoria departed, Thomas realized that his role within the royal household was evolving in ways that would have been unimaginable just a month earlier. From a security guard whose primary responsibility was observing and protecting, he was becoming an advisor whose insights would help shape the institution's approach to information management and transparency. The following week brought the first meeting of the new Document Security Committee, chaired by Sir Edward Hartwell and including representatives from legal, archival, security, and household management departments. Thomas found himself sitting at a mahogany conference table with individuals whose names he had only known from organizational charts, discussing policies that would affect the royal family's operations for years to come. The meeting's most significant revelation was the scope of changes being implemented across the entire royal household structure. The destroyed documents had apparently contained information that highlighted vulnerabilities in how sensitive correspondence was handled, stored, and disposed of throughout the royal estate. Prince William was using the crisis as an opportunity to modernize and strengthen these procedures, ensuring that future attempts at concealment or destruction would be detected and prevented. The events of recent weeks have demonstrated that our current protocols are inadequate for protecting both the integrity of our historical records and the security of sensitive information, Sir Edward explained to the committee. His Royal Highness has directed us to develop new procedures that balance transparency with necessary confidentiality, ensuring that all stakeholders understand their responsibilities and obligations. Thomas listened to the discussions with growing appreciation for the complexity of the issues involved. The royal family's correspondence included not only personal communications, but also constitutional documents, diplomatic correspondence, and historical records that affected relationships with government, Commonwealth realms, and international partners. Balancing the need to preserve these materials with legitimate requirements for privacy and security required careful consideration of legal, political, and practical factors. His own contributions to the discussions were well received, particularly his insights into how security procedures could be enhanced without creating unnecessary bureaucratic obstacles. The committee members seemed genuinely interested in his perspective, recognizing that his practical experience with daily security operations provided valuable insights that complemented their more theoretical expertise. As the meeting concluded, Sir Edward approached Thomas privately. "Officer Mitchell, I want you to know that your actions 3 weeks ago have had consequences that extend far beyond what you might have realized at the time. The information you preserved has enabled His Royal Highness to address several family issues that had been causing ongoing difficulties. Your courage in bringing those fragments to his attention has been truly invaluable." The acknowledgement from the Queen's private secretary carried enormous weight within the royal household hierarchy. Sir Edward's reputation for careful judgment and measured statements meant that his praise represented a level of recognition that few staff members ever received. For Thomas, it represented validation not only of his specific actions, but of the principles that had guided his decision-making during the crisis. That evening, as Thomas reflected on the extraordinary journey his career had taken, he received an unexpected phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was familiar, though he couldn't immediately place it. "Mr. Mitchell? This is Detective Inspector Crawford. I wondered if we might have a brief conversation about recent events at Clarence House." Thomas felt his heart rate increase, though his new role and the official recognition he had received gave him confidence that whatever Crawford wanted to discuss would not threaten his position. "Of course, Inspector. How can I help you?" "I wanted you to know that the investigation into document destruction has been officially closed," Crawford said. "The evidence indicated that any destroyed materials were handled according to proper legal authorities and procedures. Your cooperation during the investigation was noted and appreciated." The detective's carefully chosen words conveyed more than their surface meaning. Crawford was confirming that Thomas's actions had been vindicated by the investigation's outcome, and that any concerns about his handling of the discovered fragments had been resolved satisfactorily. It was another layer of validation for choices that had required enormous courage to make. "Thank you for letting me know, Inspector. I'm glad the matter was resolved appropriately." "Indeed," Crawford replied. "Sometimes these situations have complexities that aren't immediately apparent. Your professionalism throughout helped ensure that all relevant factors were properly considered." As Thomas ended the call, he understood that Detective Inspector Crawford was acknowledging the role Thomas had played in resolving the crisis while confirming that the official investigation supported his actions. It was the final piece of validation he needed to fully appreciate the significance of what had transpired over the past month. 6 months had transformed Thomas Mitchell from a dedicated but anonymous security guard into one of the most trusted advisors within the royal household security infrastructure. His new office, though modest by royal standards, represented a dramatic shift from the corridors and monitoring stations where he had spent the previous 15 years. The morning sun streaming through the windows illuminated filing cabinets containing the new document security protocols he had helped develop. Protocols that were now being implemented across all royal residences. The knock on his door interrupted his review of the quarterly security assessment reports that had become part of his expanded responsibilities. Prince William entered without ceremony, a practice that had become routine during their regular meetings, but still struck Thomas as remarkable given the vast gulf in their official positions. "Good morning, Thomas," William said, settling into the chair across from Thomas's desk with the easy familiarity of someone who had come to value their working relationship. "I wanted to discuss the implementation of the new archival procedures before this afternoon's meeting with the Commonwealth representatives." The Commonwealth meeting represented the culmination of changes that had been set in motion by the crisis 6 months earlier. The document destruction incident had revealed gaps in how sensitive correspondence was managed across the various royal households, and William had used his enhanced authority to implement comprehensive reforms that would affect royal operations throughout the British Commonwealth. "The new procedures are being well received by the archival staff," Thomas reported, consulting his notes. "The mandatory preservation protocols have eliminated the possibility of unauthorized destruction, and the digital backup systems ensure that even if physical documents are damaged, the information they contain will be permanently preserved." William nodded with satisfaction. "And the staff training program?" completed ahead of schedule. Every household employee now understands their responsibilities regarding sensitive documents, and we've established clear escalation procedures for situations where there might be questions about proper handling. The training program had been one of Thomas's proudest achievements in his new role. Working with legal experts and archival specialists, he had developed comprehensive educational materials that explained not only the practical requirements for document handling, but also the historical and constitutional importance of preserving royal correspondence for future generations. "Excellent," William said. "The Commonwealth representatives will be pleased to hear that we've addressed their concerns about information security and transparency. Your work has been instrumental in maintaining their confidence in our institutional integrity." The Commonwealth dimension added complexity to the reforms that Thomas was still learning to navigate. Many of the destroyed documents had contained correspondence with representatives from Commonwealth realms, and the news of their destruction had raised concerns about how the royal family managed information that affected relationships across the former British Empire. William's commitment to transparency and accountability had been crucial to maintaining these relationships during a period of potential crisis. "Your Royal Highness, may I ask about the specific outcomes of the Commonwealth discussions?" Thomas inquired. "Understanding their concerns will help me continue improving our security protocols." William's expression grew more serious. The destroyed documents contained correspondence dating back several decades that revealed certain inconsistencies between public statements and private communications regarding constitutional matters in several Commonwealth realms. Nothing illegal or unethical, but information that would have been embarrassing if it had become public without proper context. This was the most detailed explanation Thomas had received about the content of the burned letters, and it helped him understand why the crisis had escalated so quickly. Constitutional matters affecting Commonwealth relationships were among the most sensitive issues the royal family dealt with, and any appearance of concealment or deception could have had devastating consequences for the institution's credibility. "The fragments you preserved contained enough information to allow us to proactively address these concerns with the affected Commonwealth governments," William continued. "Rather than allowing the information to potentially surface through other channels, we were able to provide full context and explanation directly to the relevant authorities." Thomas felt a renewed sense of pride in his decision to preserve and reveal the document fragments. Not only had his actions helped resolve a crisis within the British royal family, but they had also prevented potential diplomatic disasters that could have affected relationships with nations around the world. "I'm grateful that my actions contributed to a positive resolution," Thomas replied. "May I ask what happened to the person responsible for destroying the original documents?" William's pause was telling. "The matter was resolved through private family discussions and agreements. Certain changes in responsibilities and roles have been implemented to ensure that similar situations cannot arise in the future." The diplomatic language confirmed what Thomas had observed over the past 6 months. Camilla's role within the royal family had been significantly reduced, though the changes had been implemented gradually and quietly to avoid public speculation about the reasons. She still appeared at major state occasions, but her day-to-day involvement in royal household management had been transferred to other family members and senior staff. "The important thing," William continued, "is that we've used this experience to strengthen our institutions, rather than simply resolving the immediate crisis. The new protocols you've helped develop will serve us well for generations to come." Their conversation was interrupted by Victoria Ashworth, who entered with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Your Royal Highness, I have news from the palace that I thought you'd want to hear immediately." William gestured for her to continue, and Victoria glanced at Thomas uncertainly. William nodded, indicating that Thomas should hear whatever news she had brought. "His Majesty has approved the establishment of the Royal Household Integrity Commission, with you as its first chairman," Victoria announced. "The commission will have authority to investigate any concerns about information management, transparency, or ethical conduct throughout all royal households." Thomas watched William's face light up with satisfaction and realized that this announcement represented the ultimate vindication of the approach they had taken to resolving the document destruction crisis. Rather than treating it as an isolated incident to be quietly managed, William had used it as an opportunity to create permanent institutional reforms that would prevent similar problems in the future. "That's excellent news," William said. "Thomas, I'd like you to serve as the Commission's Director of Information Security. Your experience with the practical challenges of implementing these reforms will be invaluable as we expand the program to cover all royal operations. The offer represented another dramatic expansion of Thomas's role and responsibilities. From a security guard who had stumbled upon evidence of document destruction, he was being asked to oversee information security for the entire royal household structure. It was a level of trust and authority that still seemed surreal, even after 6 months of gradual transition into increasingly senior positions. I would be honored to serve in that capacity, Thomas replied, understanding that he was accepting responsibility for protecting the institutional integrity that his own actions had helped preserve. After Victoria departed and William had left for his next appointment, Thomas found himself alone with reflections on the extraordinary path his career had taken. The fragments of burned correspondence that he had rescued from Camilla's fireplace had been more than evidence of attempted concealment. They had been the catalyst for transformative changes that would affect the royal family for decades to come. His decision to preserve and reveal those fragments had required him to choose between different interpretations of loyalty and duty. The traditional interpretation would have required him to observe royal family activities without interference, maintaining discretion even when faced with evidence of improper conduct. The interpretation he had chosen required him to prioritize institutional integrity over personal relationships, ensuring that truth and transparency prevailed even when doing so created short-term difficulties. 6 months later, it was clear that his choice had been vindicated not only by immediate outcomes, but by the long-term strengthening of royal institutions that had resulted from the crisis. The Royal Household Integrity Commission would ensure that future challenges to institutional credibility would be met with proactive transparency rather than defensive concealment. That afternoon's meeting with Commonwealth representatives provided Thomas with his first opportunity to observe high-level diplomatic discussions in his new role. He sat quietly in the corner of the conference room, taking notes on security implications, while listening to conversations that would have been unimaginable for him to attend just 6 months earlier. The Commonwealth representatives expressed strong approval for the reforms that had been implemented since the document destruction crisis. Sir James Morrison, representing the Australian government, was particularly complimentary about the new transparency protocols. Your Royal Highness, the measures you've implemented represent exactly the kind of institutional accountability that our governments need to see, Morrison said. The proactive approach to addressing historical inconsistencies has strengthened rather than weakened our confidence in the royal household's integrity. Similar sentiments were expressed by representatives from Canada, New Zealand, and several African and Caribbean Commonwealth realms. The crisis that could have damaged relationships across the former British Empire had instead become an opportunity to strengthen those relationships through enhanced transparency and accountability. As the meeting concluded, Thomas realized that his small act of preserving document fragments had contributed to diplomatic outcomes affecting millions of people across multiple continents. The silent proof he had rescued from destruction had found its voice not only within the British royal family, but in constitutional relationships that spanned the globe. That evening, as Thomas prepared to leave his office, he received a visit from Sarah, from housekeeping, who had requested a few minutes of his time to discuss what she described as a personal matter. "Tom, I wanted to thank you for something," she said once they were alone. "6 months ago, when I encouraged you to trust your instincts about what you had discovered, I wasn't certain what the outcome would be. I just knew that someone needed to have the courage to ensure the truth came out." Thomas smiled at his longtime colleague. "Sarah, your encouragement was more important than you probably realized. I'm not sure I would have had the confidence to act without knowing that other people shared my concerns." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Sarah continued. "The informal network of household staff that supported your decision has been watching the changes you've helped implement. We're all proud of how you've handled your new responsibilities, and we want you to know that you still have our support as you take on even greater challenges." Her words reminded Thomas that his success in his new role depended not only on official authority, but on the continued support of the staff members who had quietly encouraged his initial actions. The royal household's informal communication network remained as important as its official hierarchy, and maintaining those relationships would be crucial to his continued effectiveness. "I appreciate that more than you know," Thomas replied. "The new commission will need input from staff at all levels to be truly effective. I hope I can continue to count on honest feedback about how our policies are working in practice. As Sarah departed, Thomas reflected on the community of colleagues who had shaped his journey from anonymous security guard to senior advisor. His success hadn't been achieved in isolation. It had been supported by a network of dedicated professionals who shared his commitment to serving the royal family with integrity and excellence. The following morning brought news that provided a final confirmation of how completely the landscape had changed since the document destruction crisis. Detective Inspector Crawford called to inform Thomas that he was being commended by the Metropolitan Police for his cooperation during their investigation, and that his actions were being cited as an example of how civilian personnel should handle evidence in sensitive cases. Mr. Sokal, Mitchell, your professionalism during our investigation was exemplary, Crawford said. Your decision to preserve and properly report the evidence you discovered enabled us to conclude our work with complete confidence in the integrity of all parties involved. The commendation from the Metropolitan Police represented official recognition from outside the royal household that Thomas's actions had been not only appropriate, but exemplary. It was validation from the broader law enforcement community that his interpretation of duty and responsibility had been correct. As Thomas hung up the phone, he looked around his office at the documents and procedures that represented the institutional changes flowing from his discovery of those burned fragments 6 months earlier. The silent proof had indeed found its voice, speaking truths that had strengthened rather than weakened the institutions it had revealed. Thomas Mitchell, who had spent 15 years as a faithful guardian of royal secrets, had ultimately served the royal family best by ensuring that one crucial secret could no longer be kept. In doing so, he had redefined what it meant to be truly loyal, not to the institution as it was, but to what it could become when guided by truth, transparency, and accountability. The guard who had rescued fragments of burned correspondence from a fireplace had become the architect of reforms that would protect the royal family's integrity for generations to come. His loyalty had been tested by circumstances he could never have anticipated, and his response had proven that sometimes the greatest service comes from having the courage to challenge the very system one has sworn to protect. As he prepared for another day of meetings and decisions that would shape the future of royal household operations, Thomas smiled at the thought that his greatest achievement would always be those few moments when he chose to preserve evidence rather than pretend he hadn't seen it. The silent proof had spoken, and its voice would echo through the halls of royal residences for decades to come.